Hi everyone, and welcome to Dog Sports Decoded. In today's podcast, we'll be discussing parkour. My name is Megan Ritchie, and today I'm talking with parkour trainer Janilee Benell about what it is and how you can get started. So welcome, Janilee.
Hey.
Janilee is a well-known trainer and competitor in multiple dog sports, and she's graciously agreed to come on and share her knowledge and experience in parkour with us. So thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, no worries. It's fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So I guess we can jump right in. My first question is really just, how did you get started? Like, what's your background when it comes to parkour and sort of dogs in general, I guess?
Yeah, for sure. I got my little guy about, well, over 12 years ago now. We just celebrated his 13th birthday. It was about a year after I moved to Calgary. So I grew up with dogs. They were always in my life. I spent about a year in Calgary without a dog or any friends that had dogs, really. So we were very much missing that piece. And then when I got my little guy, he was just a normal everyday pet dog that didn't quite get as much training as I would suggest anybody now. I came from PEI, so country living is very different for a dog than living in a city, right? So he became fairly reactive and sort of pushed me into the dog world to help him out. Okay, so for him, that's really where I got my start for training. I've been interested in dog training as well as dog sports for probably about 10 years now. I started my training journey about 9 years ago with an apprenticeship program, and I've been training professionally for about 8 years now. So mostly pet dog stuff, focusing on reactivity and so forth, and dabbling really in the last few years in sports. So I've never been a competitive type person except for the last couple years. We just started having fun in more formal type sports. For parkour, we've been doing parkour unofficially, I would say, for probably 12 years. Not really knowing what we're doing for a lot of those years, but having fun with it and really focusing on just enjoying my dog and doing stuff that we could do with I have two reactive dogs out in the real world that really didn't involve too many other people or other dogs and so forth, because my little guy is people and dog reactive.
Okay. When you say you weren't doing it officially when you started, how did you start then? With tricks, or what was kind of your introduction to it?
Not one that I would suggest for anybody. My introduction to it really, well, I wouldn't suggest it. I feel like there's a lot of people that do parkour and don't really know what it's called. But essentially just getting up on rocks and just getting my dog to focus on something that wasn't other beings in the environment. And sort of seeing where they can go. I know that sounds really bad, but safety wise and so forth, I would say that I didn't really think of it very often. So I had at one point, both my dogs at that time would jump up on like railings and so forth, and the barriers that you have in between traffic in the sidewalk. You might see where this is going. And at one point, we were just walking down the sidewalk. We were crossing a bridge on a really busy street. I had not asked my dog to get up, and he just randomly decided to jump because that's what he did, right? It was always fun. He jumped on the barrier, which was probably, and I think you've met Fuzz before, who's very small. It was probably about half the width of him when he tried to land it. And I literally scooped him as there was a car coming and he was falling onto the other side.
Oh, scary.
So I wouldn't suggest some of the things that we did, like not really giving it a cue to begin with. And just having fun with it. But yeah, that's just one story of not really knowing what I'm doing as a pet dog owner, because I wasn't even training at that point. We were just trying to survive, really.
I think that's the hard thing. I guess as a common thread talking to multiple trainers, it's so hard because even as a professional trainer now, you know, your growth through that journey, like nobody starts off perfect. Like you might be a dog trainer 10 years later, but your first dog, you weren't a dog trainer, so you made those
definitely.
along with everybody else. So
yeah, if you spend any numerous amount of time with my little old man, you know very quickly I was not a dog trainer. I hope you do anyways. I was not a dog trainer whenever he came to hang out with us, but he's pretty good now for the most part.
Yeah. So when you kind of talk about your sort of traffic incident, was that sort of the first biggest issue you faced when you started doing parkour, or what was kind of your biggest hurdle when you first jumped into it?
Yeah, I would say just the lack of control. My girl, Charlotte, she's a boxer shepherd cross. We got her as an agilities prospect when I had no idea what I was doing or what I really wanted, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Or really how much time and training it takes to be a really good agility dog. Seriously, kudos to people that do agility. I'm not even joking. Because for her, we spent a whole lot of time building value in doing the things, whether it be an agility type setting or just jumping on stuff.
Yeah.
And we didn't spend very much time teaching her how to safely do said things, if that makes sense. So there was quite a few times where she randomly decided to climb trees that were not safe to do so.
Right.
I've caught her probably more often than she's balanced herself in the beginning.
Okay.
And she's 75 pounds. So she's not a little dog.
Yeah.
I'm really lucky in the fact that as they're older, so her and Fuzz are both, well, he's 13 and she's 10 now. We don't have a whole lot of issues when it comes to joints and so forth. There's some things cropping up, but nothing that's super scary.
Yeah.
But in the long run, looking back at what we did, it probably was just really the luck of the draw, because some of the stuff she was doing when she was like 6 to 9 months, she probably shouldn't have been doing at all.
Yeah. Sometimes that ignorance is bliss thing.
Yes. He's probably my best parkour dog just because of that, to be honest.
Yeah, well, that's good. I guess before we get any further, we should probably explain what parkour is. Do you want to take a stab at kind of explaining?
Yeah, for sure. Parkour, a lot of people call it urban agility. I hear urban agility a lot in the city. But really what it is, so it's called parkour or dog parkour from the people that founded this whole sport, I guess, if you want to call it that. I like calling it an activity. But they founded it after doing parkour themselves. Okay. So human parkour, if you have never heard of it, it's pretty phenomenal what human beings can do, but it's going up and over, around, under, anything you can do with random objects in your environment. So unlike agility where there's like jumps and tunnels and very specific pieces of equipment, a big piece of parkour is looking at different objects and sort of creatively thinking of how you can interact with that object.
Yeah.
So for them, they were dog people. One's a vet, the other one is a trainer. They're both trainers, but and they sort of wanted to get their dogs involved while they're out doing parkour with themselves. So that's sort of where it came from, and that's really what parkour is just creatively interacting with your environment, I guess is the best way to put it.
It's definitely something I want to ask you about more, but we'll keep going here and maybe I'll get.
Yeah, sure.
But so is there something that governs this? Like, is there a titling program, or is there an association that kind of has, I don't want to say set tricks, or I don't know what you'd call them, but
behaviors.
Thank you.
Yeah, there is. So International Dog Parkour Association, so IDPKA, is a governing body for them. So they're the ladies that found it, or coined, I guess, parkour. I'm pretty sure I was doing the same thing, just way less organized and smartly, without even knowing human parkour existed, to be honest. But for around the same amount of time, but they founded it. They have a governing body they really think, just like human parkour, that really it should be about your journey. So you and your dog's teamwork and building up on things. But they do have titles and so forth that you can go for that have different specific behaviors. The awesome thing about them is that, for example, I have a 12-pound dog and a 75-pound dog. It would be a little foolish of me to think that my 12-pound dog could jump as much as my 75-pound dog, right? They can't really do the exact same feats.
Yeah.
So when it comes to parkour with IDPKA, oh my goodness, they really focus on the dog itself. So for example, if you have to do a behavior in which all 4 paws go onto an object that's a certain height, they'll say, well, for this 4-on behavior, it has to be up to the dog's shoulder height.
Okay, rather
right?
than
So
4-foot height or something like that.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So, which is really nice. So sizes and stuff, it really encompasses all the dogs rather than being a very specific body type.
Right. And is it something that's more organized? Like I believe you offer classes in it, but does it tend to be more organized event or more sort of one-on-one? You're out walking your dog and you're dreaming something up, like?
It really depends. I have group classes that we haven't during the winter time because it's a little cold and slippery.
Yeah.
But during the summer now, when it's coming up, we'll have drop-in classes. And really what it is sort of like a group walk where ideally all of us in class are sort of pointing out things that we can play with and do different behaviors on. Class-wise, we really focus on just slowly building up the team. So for example, if your dog is having a hard time walking across something like a balance beam, we'll focus on teaching them a little bit more body awareness and building that behavior up if you want.
Yeah, always a good idea.
Yeah.
They're not falling off those high things like the agility walk and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I guess then what would you recommend if somebody kind of saw it and wanted to get started themselves? Where would be sort of your first step you would recommend somebody do, if not the way you started?
I think the first step would be really just focusing on the safety aspect of it. So learning how to spot your dog on a lower object. So for me, Charlotte has been on things that are way above my head, which means that I have to know that I can catch her, right? Because falling off of something like that is not really just a small owie. It could be a pretty good detriment to the dog. Yeah. And some things where it comes to balancing, I think I have a really quick video, but you have to sort of show them or be able to handle them so they don't fall off of things. For parkour, they suggest or they require your dogs on a harness, so a back clip harness. Okay. With a leash, unless you're doing something that the dog can do safely on their own.
Okay. So when you talk safety, maybe it's easier to walk through an example, but what would be of a certain behavior? What would be an example behavior? What would be a safe way to do it? Maybe a not safe way to do it, if that's the easiest way to kind of explain.
Yeah, for sure. So for example, getting up on like a post. So having 4 feet on just a random post that's a lot taller than the dog, I guess.
Like something like that you're thinking?
Sorry?
Like a fence post or something like
that?
Yeah,
like a fence post. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so getting 4 feet on the fence post, you can easily, like if your dog will jump on it, asking them to jump on it, your dog might land it. If they don't, they could very easily hurt themselves. Yeah. Face plant is one of them. Don't ask me how I know. But twisting their bodies and so forth and contorting themselves can really help or really hurt them in the long run. Okay. So with the harness and a shorter leash, you can ask them to get on it and sort of help guide them to make sure that they're steady, right? Yeah.
So when it comes to safety, then are you thinking, like, so far the examples we've run through have been more sort of falling related, but is there also like I don't want to say like stretch injuries, things like that, or is it really just like falling or puncturing on a certain object? Is that the biggest concern?
I would say falling is fairly a big concern depending on what exercises you're doing. But I agree, stretching, twisting yourself and so forth, if the dog's not quite ready for that level of exercise, could be a pretty severe injury, especially when soft tissue stuff takes a really long time to heal.
Okay. Well, I don't want to drag on all the safety stuff and make people think this is a horrible dangerous sport.
It isn't. It's so fun.
Yeah. We're just getting the safety stuff out of the way first.
Yeah.
Okay. So we obviously don't want your dog to get injured, so that's a very good first step for sure. So where would be a good place to practice then if we're going to go give this a try?
Really anywhere. So downtown's great. Your parks and so forth. So like lower rocks, different objects that your dog can crawl under. So what I would really suggest is just going out in the environment, seeing what you can find on your local walk, right? So if you're just going out for your walk, sort of put your creative thinking cap on and sort of see how you can get your dog to interact with different objects. The biggest thing being is don't ask your dog for something that you think is going to be really hard for them at first. You may as well just build it up and get a little bit more buy-in from your dog to make it a fun sport for both of you.
Right. I know I've seen some really cool videos that you've shared of different obstacles you've found. They're probably a little more advanced, you know, or middle ground, I assume, at some point. But so if somebody was just starting, they'd find like a big boulder, something like that, or a park bench. Is that a fair, depending on the dog?
Yeah. So really depending on your dog. But yeah, boulders, park benches, even like mailboxes and so forth, getting your dog to go underneath them. So like the big community mailboxes.
Yeah.
Obviously, depending on how big your dog is. Fleur, my little American bully, I sometimes ask him to go under things that he doesn't quite fit under. But he's really good at saying no. So,
so listen to your dog if they say no.
Yes. Yeah, that's another big part of it. Really, if you teach your dog how to safely go through things and politely ask that they don't do it, a lot of the time I can notice if Charlotte's feeling sore because she has mid-back pain, getting to become an old dog, by asking her to go under something and she'll refuse. Okay. So she won't crawl because it puts pressure on that point in her back. And it gives me a good indication of how she's feeling, but also it means that I'm not sort of depleting the behavior and making it no fun anymore.
Right. So if I found a cool park bench and I want to try this on, are you luring them on? Would that be kind of the first behavior you teach, just like 4 on 4 off kind of thing, or what would be?
Yeah, so for the first behavior that I typically suggest teaching would be a 2 on behavior. So teaching your dog to put their 2 paws on something, okay. Which opens up your world a little bit more of getting more objects and stuff that you can get your dog to put 2 paws on. So even trees, getting your dog to stand up tall and putting their paws on the trees. It's a nice way to teach them to stretch and get comfortable with things, and slowly luring them on can really just help them. A lot of people like teaching their dog to jump on and off of things, which is awesome. I do, however, find that if you teach your dog to go on with 4 paws first, it's really hard to get that 2 on behavior because they just assume that you want the 4 on all the time.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of related to that then, you just kind of tweaked my brain. When you were talking about sort of stretching up 2 paws on a tree, would you start with something like that even for a more experienced dog so they warm up? Or is that just kind of like your beginner step, and then once they are, I'll say, better trained in it or know what you ask, do you skip that, or do you always kind of start with something easy like that?
I think it really depends on the dog and what exercise I'm doing. So for Charlotte, if I'm doing something that's not really pushing her body, I typically won't get her to stretch or so forth. But if I'm getting her to do something where I know she's going to be using a lot of muscles to hold herself up, or she's going to be stretching or needing to move in a way that she hasn't for a while, typically I'd get her to do a few pretty easy behaviors and really focus on just sort of stretching out her joints a little bit so that she doesn't injure herself.
And even just difficulty level wise, do you start with like I'll say an easy behavior first and then build something more difficult that you say they can do it, but do you start easy and then go difficult, or does it really not matter a whole lot either way?
It can help, especially for the dogs that are lacking a little bit more confidence. So the nice thing about parkour is dogs that are lacking confidence or a little bit environmentally sensitive, I guess is the best way to put it. It can really just give them a different view on life. So those dogs, I would really focus on just slowly building them up. So every exercise would start off really pretty easy or simple, and slowly move up to something harder. And then I would usually end with something that was super easy for them.
Okay.
For dogs that are overtly confident, the ones that tend to throw themselves at objects, I would likely do the same thing, more so for the handler. So Charlotte is a dog that has never had any issue with confidence when it comes to objects in the environment. So for her, now I typically wouldn't start super easy unless I'm asking her for something that I know she's really going to have to think through. But before, I would have started with something easy, really just to slow her down, to get her thinking and moving her paws a little bit more thoughtfully.
Yep.
So that we could decrease the chance of her jumping over top of the object, which she has done multiple times. So for depending, starting out, I would say always start off easy, get a lot of buy-in from your dog, and really learn sort of their communication style with you.
Okay. Because I guess even just like a dog that's just like brimming with energy and maybe not even like super confident, but just like that energetic, I don't know, I'm thinking like bounce off the walls Labrador that just like stop moving their body, like you said, just to get them thinking right away, and kind of, instead of just exploding off of things, bouncing off the walls, maybe a good way to start.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. So getting them to focus on something that might be a little bit easier, but safer. I also find a lot of people like the bigger, the better things.
Yeah.
The bigger.
Human nature.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And I can't say that I haven't been that person. That's why Charlotte's really good at parkour. However, now that I have my younger guy, who's 3, it's really interesting to me to go back and watch. In comparison, he's extremely thoughtful of his placement, and I think that's slightly his personality, but also living with Charlotte, I didn't really want to play that game again, or chance it again, I guess. Yeah. So it's been really interesting to see getting him to do things that don't seem super difficult, but the dog needs to be thoughtful to put 4 paws on an object that's half the size of their body, right? And that's not something Charlotte could have done at the age of 3, because for her it would have just been, well, that's just a stepping stone, right? So the bigger the better really isn't always the best way, because it's actually really interesting to see your dog be able to do something that seems fairly simple, but if you think of it in terms of how their body works, placement and so forth is fairly difficult for them.
It sounds like you're thinking of an example there, like a particular trick or something, or?
I don't know. I might have one.
Like I'm just thinking something like back up seems to be something that's not intuitively easy for them to do, but.
Let's see if I can share this.
Okay.
This might be interesting.
Multiple technologies at work is always a recipe for disaster, so.
All right. I'll see if I can share. I don't know if we can talk through this or not, but let's see. All right. So this is Fleur for his intermediate title. So he already has his novice. For his intermediate title, he needs to do a behavior or 5 behaviors on one object. So I found this object really interesting for him. So we can sort of go through them. For Charlotte, we would do totally different objects or totally different behaviors on this, mainly because she's not as thoughtful, to be honest. So I'll quickly play through it there for you. I can tell you what we're doing. So there's a 2-on behavior. For Charlotte, it would be pretty quick for her to do that. She's done it for quite a while. Now I'm getting him to stay on it for usually about 5 seconds in between. It's mainly so that the people watching the video and judging it can tell that he's doing it and understands what he's supposed to be doing.
It's not just a fluke.
So this is what, sorry?
That it's not just a fluke or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a balance, he had to go around a pole there so you can sort of see he was sliding. And then his under behavior. Charlotte hates doing unders, so we would probably do a jump over that, to be honest.
Yeah. I guess that's
because we never spent time doing unders.
I guess that's where just knowing your dog's strengths and weaknesses too.
Exactly. And then back up. So this is a pretty precise movement. I can show you again here. So he has to find the platform with his foot to back all the way up onto it.
Not very easy.
No.
That's cool. Thank you for sharing that.
No worries.
So if somebody was kind of listening here and they thought it might be good for their dog, like what kind of dog would you recommend do it? Or like, is there, I don't want to say a breed, because I don't mean breed, but would there be a type of dog energy wise or like with health concerns that you would not recommend it, or somebody that you would recommend it for?
Honestly, I would recommend it to anybody that wants to really just have fun with their dogs. I would say some dogs are a little bit more athletic, so it'll be easier for the titles if you're planning on titling your dog in it. But in saying that, their titling program is really unique, so you have to get your novice title as like a base title for anything. But afterwards, you can go ahead and doing what they call their creative or their championship title, which really is all focusing on your journey with your dog, your enjoyment with your dog, and how creative you can be. Mm-hmm. Whereas the other titles, the intermediate and the expert title, really focuses on your dog's ability to do things like balancing at double shoulder height, right? Or some of it is pushing me and Fleur. Or doing a balance that's 3 times the length of your dog, that is either 2 widths of your dog's paws, or half the width of your dog, which is pretty narrow, and having them turn on said balance. So they have to go across the balance, do a 180 turn and come back, which not all dogs would be able to do that. In saying that, the awesome thing about parkour is it really focuses, and the community itself is really, really fun. So it really focuses on enjoying your dog and really just celebrating anything you can get journey-wise, right? So no matter the handler or the dog, I know a lot of handlers that are disabled themselves and their dogs can do and enjoy the sport just fine. So it doesn't really matter if your dog, say they have bad hips, so jumping and so forth isn't really in the game for them. They can still do a lot of stuff, even the 4-on behaviors, just finding a different way to get on it.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like it's the different behavior options make it quite open to, I'll say, even older dogs or just dogs with health or injury issues that you don't have to worry too much. You can just kind of work with what you have.
Yeah, totally.
What you're comfortable with. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing of it, is just working where you and your dog's comfortable, because there's so many sports out there that, even though they are extremely inclusive, or as inclusive as they can be, when you live with a fairly reactive dog, you learn how quickly some of those sports are not really that good, even when they are trying really hard. It's just, sorry, go ahead.
That was going to be my next question, was just, you talked about reactivity earlier, and it sounds like a great way for, I'd say, especially an energetic kind of reactive dog. We probably want them to kind of slow down and think a little bit anyway. and we want to give them something else to focus on. So it sounds like a really great sport for that, because you can do it more solo instead of trying to go into a trial environment and really struggle with probably amp them up even more.
Yeah, and all the titling and all that stuff is all videoed and sent into them. So it's really nice. You just get yourself a tripod if you don't have anybody that will come along and video for you.
Yes.
Spend a lot of time with my dogs. And then you just go out and enjoy your dog. And I think the biggest thing when it comes to living with a reactive dog is there's not that many places that you can celebrate how amazing your dog is, even though all dogs are pretty amazing, in my experience. Yeah. So with parkour, you can really focus on doing and accomplishing different things, and really just celebrating how awesome your dog has been.
Cool. I guess maybe skip tracks here a little bit. So what is it? We talked a little bit about kind of finding on a city walk, you're just going to find something you find interesting and use it. So what is it that you're kind of looking for in an environment, or somebody else could look for it in an environment, or is it just something that catches your eye?
For me, I would say it's probably something that catches my eye now, because I've been doing it for a really long time. But really environments that have a lot of different structures, so fences, different objects, ideally not memorials, only because it's just not very nice. But different structures, statues, stuff like that, that your dog can interact with safely. Rocks and fallen trees and the more like environmental stuff that just comes out naturally is really, really fun as well. And as you grow and as your dog gets better, you can sort of like open up your world a little bit more and do more things.
So I don't know if you'll know what I'm talking about here, but I know I saw a video of you working in it. There's a bunch of trees and kind of planters. I don't know how to explain. They kind of looked like cupcake holders, the planters, if that makes sense.
Maybe. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I know. I might have a video.
So like if you saw something like that, they're trees and planters, what's going through your brain that you're thinking like, okay, what can I do with that?
Sure. So planters are awesome, especially when there's no flowers actually planted in them. People tend to frown upon you getting your dog in the plants. Yes. But I think the one that you're talking about, the planter itself was actually completely empty. So it's like a big round, like 3 round planters.
Yeah, I
think that's what you were thinking of.
Yeah.
2 of them were actually level, so if my dog jumped on it, it landed on the level ground. The one that was closest to my dog at the time was actually completely empty, which meant that she could get into it, which in the video is what I was trying to do, and that's not what happened. But for that, you could do 2 on, you could do 4 on, you could get your dog in the planter itself. You could have your dog sort of straddling the edges of the planter, going around it, or even backing up onto it if your dog has a really good backup cue.
So if somebody's, I'll say like me, they don't know what, I'll say, behaviors are allowed, is that something they could go to that international parkour website and it would kind of list the behaviors? Okay. So
so for each title, they have different behaviors. So as your dog gets higher up in titles, there's some more behaviors to do. Charlotte and I only did our novice and our championship, because when you get to intermediate, your dog has to do what they call a tic-tac, which is essentially a rebound off of something.
Okay.
So if you've done fly ball, it's like a fly ball turn, but on not a fly ball box. When Charlotte and I were doing the titles, she was quite a bit older. I think she was 7 or 8 at the time, and started showing a little bit of signs of arthritis in her wrist. So we chose not to go that route, mainly because we spent a whole lot of time teaching her not to rebound off of things. I didn't want to put value back into that behavior. But a rebound is a really fun thing. It's what Fleur's learning right now. You can do stuff like gap jumps where you're jumping from one object to another with space in between, which are all a little bit more advanced behaviors. But really, at the end of the day, it's all about just interacting with the behavior. So even if you've never gone to the website to look at the different behaviors, it's still just interacting with the object. So you can sort of make up your own and so forth. The biggest thing is it's not like a trick, right? So like it's not getting on something and spinning. That's still just 4 on.
Right, okay. That makes some sense. Okay, so somebody has done that. They've kind of tried it on their own. They've kind of played with some different obstacles. They think their dog likes it. They like it. What could they do that would be kind of the next step to like help them develop and grow within the sport?
Next step, I would say, is probably just joining. So we have a very small group right now, but on Facebook we have Calgary Dog Parkour. It's a Facebook group. And then the IDPKA, I always say that wrong. Their Facebook group is Dog Parkour Training, which is just, it's a really big community that you can post videos, ask questions and so forth, and really just get more creative ideas back or feedback on, and sort of makes it a little bit more of a community type thing. If you want to do, so if you don't have a reactive dog, it's hard for reactive dogs. You can always come and watch anyways, or contact me. But we do some group classes and so forth that are all drop-in. So essentially you just sign up to do that one drop-in class, and hang out.
Cool. And we talked a little bit about equipment, I think, when we first jumped on, but it sounds like you just kind of need a leash and a harness. Is there anything else?
Yeah, so a leash, a back clip harness, ideally a harness that doesn't cut off your dog's movement. So a Y-shaped harness that goes in between their legs rather than one that comes across their shoulders is more suggested. And just a regular 6-foot leash.
Okay.
That's
so
it, that's all.
Tool intensive, that's kind of nice.
No, and your dog's food, because
yeah,
if you're asking them to do something, you may as well pay them for it.
That's right. And how long would it take for somebody to start to kind of see results? It sounds like, I'll say pretty instantaneously, like you should be able to get them to do it 2 on pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's pretty quick. You can really build on behaviors really quickly too, which is nice because a lot of the time there's not really any pressure involved in it. If your dog's having a really hard time with one object, you just go to the next object and forget about that one, for the moment, right? And have a fun time with your dog. So it's pretty instantaneous for the behaviors.
Okay. Is there anything that you see people doing that maybe stops them from continuing with it, or maybe makes them think they're not having fun, their dog's not enjoying it, so they stop? Is there any kind of typical failure points?
Yes. A lot of the time people don't usually give their dog the choice to get on and off certain things. So they'll see it, they'll see people doing it, they'll get super excited because the dog's having fun, the human's having fun, and then they'll go and try and get their dog on something, and the dog will put on the brakes. Which is very normal, especially if your dog has never done anything, or they might be a little bit sensitive to different surfaces, which is what we're really asking them to do, right? Is to interact with a different surface. A lot of the time people will turn around and start pulling on the dog, or they'll lift them up and put them on an object, which really is a no-go. A lot of the times if you're lifting your dog to put them on an object, you're sort of taking away all that choice, and increasing the likelihood of them injuring themselves, to be honest. It also means that if they didn't really want to in the first place and you sort of just force them on it, they're likely going to put on the brakes a lot sooner, right?
Yeah, it makes sense. I wasn't doing parkour, but I know a few times I've taken Tess out hiking, and they've got kind of the park benches out there. People can sit and see the scenery and that, and they've kind of got the slats. I don't know how else to describe it. But I've asked her to jump on that, and it's a 2-foot jump. She should easily be able to do it, but it's just that different surface, and she just hated it. And it was my own stupidity. I should have clued in, but just simple things like that. You say changing the surface can make a big difference.
Yeah, and that's a great thing about parkour. If you want to generalize behaviors, so if you want to have a really good sit and down and stand and all of those random obedience behaviors that nobody really thinks about until they ask their dog to do it. Parkour is amazing because your dog gets really, really comfortable with doing those behaviors on varying surfaces and varying heights. And varying distracting levels, to be honest. But yeah, those slatted benches are, they can be really hard. They can be really painful in the paws too when they jump up, depending on if your dog is comfortable jumping and landing properly.
Yeah. When I'm thinking again, just like even kids' playgrounds, like some of those wobbly bridges and stuff. I don't know if you go to a lot of playgrounds with the dogs to do it, but there's definitely some interesting surfaces there with the perforated metal that wouldn't be very comfortable. And so
yeah. In Calgary, it is against bylaw to have your dog in a playground.
Well, I've never done
it. Just so you know. Unless Airdrie changed their bylaws, you can play on playgrounds in Airdrie. Okay. The biggest ask, and I think there's a different, like, depending on your community, there's different bylaws and so forth. But I think, like, really the biggest thing is if you're playing on playgrounds, which I agree are phenomenal and amazing, the dogs have fun on them. Some surfaces are really hard on their toes, so be aware of that. But yeah, playground wise, just make sure you're not playing while the children are playing as well. Is the biggest.
Especially if you have a dog that's scared of children.
Yes, yeah, don't play with that one.
Yeah, okay. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to touch on here. I think that I covered a lot of it. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on that I haven't asked you about while I look at my notes here?
No, I don't. I think you've touched on a lot of it.
Okay. I guess one question here is there anywhere you go to get kind of news on parkour? If there's, it sounds like a couple of Facebook pages, but if there's, say, an up and coming trainer that you kind of want to see what they're doing with their dog, where would you go to kind of see that? Or
just the Facebook pages. There seems to be quite a bit of information that goes into the dog parkour training, and I try to keep up with it on the Calgary parkour dog parkour page. But yeah, it's really just a lot of word of mouth community wise, and just a lot of fun just playing around with it.
Yeah, okay. And is there any changes you've seen sort of within that sport, if we're going to call it that, from when you got started to today? Is there any big changes?
I would say a lot of changes, just more so about the thoughtfulness and the safety of the dogs. For me anyways, mainly because when I started, I had no idea what I was doing, or that it was a thing. Yeah. But really just focusing on teaching the dogs the behaviors rather than asking them to do something that is totally out of their wheelhouse and then paying the consequences and reteaching them afterwards. Never done that before. Yeah. Only with all of Charlotte's behaviors. But I think that's the biggest thing, is really changing sort of how you look at a behavior and how you're teaching the dog to do it. Yeah. And building that up over time rather than just asking them for the nice big spectacular thing and then backtracking afterwards when you realize that that didn't really work out as you planned.
They weren't ready for that yet.
Yes.
I know you had a couple videos. Did you want to walk us through any of them, or
yeah, for sure,
tell us what you're doing? Or
for sure, I have a couple videos. Sorry.
Or just brag on your dogs a little bit. That's okay.
Yeah, too. For sure. I have a couple videos regarding spotting and then some really fun ones.
Okay.
They're not all my dogs, to be honest. Some of them are clients' dogs that enjoy parkour with me. If I share the screen again properly, 1 second. All right. So I'll go through a couple of balance ones first. So this one is Ellie. Ellie's fairly new to parkour, and I'm just teaching her how to do a balance. So really she's on a wide object. I have the leash really low or short for her, and I'm using my hand to sort of lure her around and slowly feeding her.
Yeah, I'm assuming most of your training is going to be luring to start.
Yeah, a lot of it is luring. I do like to shape some behaviors, but a lot of it is luring and sort of building that confidence in the dogs.
Yeah, okay.
Just gonna, yeah. And then this one is my other dude, Casper. He's not my dog, but I like to call him my loner husky. So he's getting up on this. It's pretty slippery, so you can sort of see him make the choice to change how he was getting up.
Yeah.
And you can see my hand, if I want to go back to that one. Sorry. You can see my hand in the video fairly tight. So you can see the clip fairly tight on his back, only because he was sliding. Yeah. So I'm not pulling up completely on his harness.
Is that just add another connection point, so to speak, like almost like a tripod?
Yeah. Essentially, if he put his foot off, I'm holding him up if he fell any, like if he went down any farther, which is the biggest point of having it on a back clip harness rather than a collar. You could probably see, I can show you one here of Charlotte balancing on a small post. You can see I'm using the leash the exact same way, and then I just sort of relax the tension when she actually lands it. If you think of this, her doing this behavior and me being attached to her collar, I'm just going to completely throw her off balance.
Right.
Right. And then I would end up with the dog hanging off of their collar or their neck, which is not something I ever suggest to do.
No.
Okay. So the back clip harness really helps because it's sort of mid back, so it can sort of help support her rather than throwing her completely off balance.
I guess that's something I hadn't thought about, but that would be, yeah, right there, center of balance too.
Yeah. So this is her on her two paws. And then when she goes up, you can sort of see me pulling backwards rather than letting her fall forwards. And I caught her with my arm.
Cool.
The other nice thing, so this is about the same height, if not higher, than the post that Charlotte was balancing on. The nice thing about this is that for small dogs or even large dogs, if you want to go that route, they can get on an object whichever way you want them to. Okay, so for Fuzz has learned over time that he can climb on me, so he can use me as a step stool essentially to get onto objects. Not something I've ever taught Charlotte to do because she's heavy.
Yeah.
But for Fuzz, he can sort of climb on top of me, and that's totally fair in the game, even when you're going for parkour titles. The only thing that you're not allowed to do while you're doing titles is to lift your dog and like place them on an object, because that's not really the same thing.
I guess the point where it's not been close.
Yeah, right. So you can sort of see him jump up, and then I caught him by the harness there, so I'm holding him because there's a whole lot of holes on top of there where he's going. To get off, it's the same thing. So he can use me to get off, which he politely says nope. Or I can lift him. So I have a lift cue for him where I say lift, and he just sort of lets me pick him up because he's a very sensitive boy that doesn't like being touched. But it prevents him from jumping down off of things.
And that seems to be something we hear more and more just in dog training in general, just letting the dog have that choice. So it's
totally.
It's his choice to go on an object. I don't know, it's something I hadn't heard about much kind of when I first started, but it seems to be a more and more common topic.
Yeah, it definitely is, especially in the last couple of years in the dog training community. It used to be a lot of counter conditioning and focusing on like making the dog want to do the behavior. Whereas now you're still counter conditioning, you're still making it enjoyable for the dog to do it, but giving them the choice actually You can see a lot better behaviors from them. And there's a lot more buy-in for the dog to do it, which is really nice to see.
Yeah.
When it comes to parkour, giving them the choice to get on something or say getting off something, like Buzz did in this video where he was just like, nope, I'm not getting off by climbing on you.
Yeah.
Really what I notice is the people or the other dogs that I've seen placed on things, typically their joints and their muscles and everything are really tense.
Okay.
So if you're asking them to jump or to land on something like I just asked Fuzz to, which has a whole lot of holes in it, it's a slippery surface, and it has fairly small percentage of places for him to put his feet properly, he's more apt to pull a muscle or to really put something out of joint if he's really tense and he slips.
So I'm guessing this would not be your recommendation for a first object for somebody to try with their dog?
No. The one with Ellie in it is a really good first object. The object itself is slightly slippery, but it's a really wide one.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of surface for the dog. And it gives them a pretty good, like, it's a really nice, fun object. But it's not super, super difficult.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I just have a video, just a fun video of Fleur doing a gap jump. So a gap jump is jumping in between the two rocks here. He likes to investigate his surroundings before he jumps. And then getting off, I'm lowering him to the ground. So I'm using his harness again.
Okay.
Mainly so he doesn't end up, mainly so he doesn't end up putting a whole lot of pressure on his front joints, as you notice.
Yeah, it looks like your harnesses have a fair bit of padding on them too. Like they're quite wide. Like they're not impeding motion, but they're quite wide in the padding. So they're not just like a thin, narrow nylon.
Yeah. All my dogs like different harnesses. I'm a gear Nazi, so I have lots of options.
Yeah.
But Charlotte wears a balance harness typically, or a rough wear Webmaster harness. Okay. I found has a lot of, and it has a handle as well. Has a lot of support for her because she's a little bit longer than the other ones.
Yeah.
Buzz wears a mesh harness, which I honestly don't suggest anybody ever buy one because it's rather annoying for most dogs. You have to put their head in and lift their paw to get it in, and it's just not fun to get on. For whatever reason, that is his favorite harness. So he wears that one. It doesn't impede movement, and if he were to fall, which he has before, I can catch him just with the leash and it holds him.
Right.
With Fleur, the size of balance harness that fits him is really narrow. So the straps are like this narrow on him, and he's a pretty hefty dude. So I can't imagine that would be comfortable if I was catching him off of something. So he wears a Bark Industry harness that fits him really nicely. But yeah, it has a lot of padding.
Okay. Well, I would think, like you said, more surface area is going to be more comfortable if they do end up kind of leaning on you, whether that's you holding the leash or whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, I think that's really all the questions I had for today. Unless there's anything else I've not asked you that you think I should have asked you.
No, I think you covered everything.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
If people want to learn more about you, where can they go to find out about your classes or your training days, your drop-in days?
My website is pauseandrelax.net. So www.pauseand, just the letter, relax.net.
Okay. I'll throw that in the video.
Perfect. Yeah. Where I have all my classes and all that stuff. Calgary Dog Parkour is a very new Facebook group. I started it when we was getting my instruction certificate with parkour. So it started off as just like a group class information session. And we just sort of opened it up to more people so we can get more people enjoying it and enjoying parkour safely. Because I think a lot of people in Calgary do parkour. They just don't really know that there's a name to it. and some things to be aware of, I guess.
I can't believe the number of dogs I see out on our walks doing different things. So yeah, it definitely seems to be popular.
It's fun.
Yeah.
And it's an awesome way to interact with your dog, and make your walk a little bit more enjoyable, when it comes to just being out in the environment.
Sometimes I think more interesting too. Like I think of like throwing a tennis ball for a dog can be kind of boring if you're not mixing other stuff in there, or say we both play disc. If you're just throwing a disc without doing anything else, it's not always the most exciting thing. So if our dog just heels beside us on a walk, it's kind of the same idea where
Yeah.
we can be creative and come up with some different ideas.
Yeah, and it really helps with like engagement, and focus for your dog as well. I think Charlotte would disagree that throwing a disc was not enjoyable. Um, my arm agrees with you.
Yeah.
However, I can tell you she loves parkour. If you gave her the option of disc and parkour, she would like to do it both at the same time. Not safe. Um, However, after doing disc, she does need to do something to calm down, and to refocus. Whereas with parkour, she gets her physical and mental exercise at the same time, which is pretty amazing.
Ideal. You don't have to do two things with them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. I know I learned a ton here, so I hope our listeners did as well. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
No worries, anytime.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.